was 1985. I remember being a teenager and I read author Alice Walker's Pulitzer Prize winning book, The Color Purple. That year, it was released as a movie with a star-studded cast. They had the potential to be the most incredible cast of their time, at least in that day. Sadly, the movie became one that was seen in some places as controversial. It was a blockbuster movie for Black women in America, but it had been banned in some schools and some prisons in the state of Texas because they decided that it was too controversial. It had graphic depictions of violence and explicit language and sexual innuendo and other content that they felt simply was not becoming at that time. Some parents, in fact, of high schoolers in those days, they were in an uproar because they didn't want to impact their children. Keyword there. I don't know about you, but I'd be really interested to hear what's on the music playlist of their children and their grandchildren in today's world, where standards of what is profane and what is not are quite different in relation to, I don't know, what's consumed through music and film today comparatively. Now, this film, it featured a protagonist named Miss Celie. She was an uneducated, poor, abused woman in the Deep South who had suffered at the hands and ill-intentioned hearts of others spanning a period of over 4 long decades. And though there were several memorable lines in the movie, the one that stuck out to me the most was when a fellow character told her in no uncertain terms, "You sure is ugly." Can you imagine being beat down by life, even molested and treated like you were less than gum on the bottom of a shoe? And someone had the audacity to tell you that you're ugly? Ugly. Her life was ugly. Yet she continued to live it, existing in her own unique way, surviving despite the muck and mire that she endured. I remember feeling sadness, extreme sadness for Celie. The very thought that someone, somebody, anybody, some person could say something like that to a woman who had already seemed like life had simply been unfair. I can tell you, back then I was different. I wanted to save the world. If I could, I would have put on my Save the World cape or got on my Save the World magic carpet and flown right on over to that movie set to stand up for Miss Celie. It kind of could have got ugly, no pun intended. But honey, later, in came Miss Sophia. And she was feisty. I love the way she sauntered on to the screen, making you excited about what she was going to say. She was a robust Black woman who often stood up for Celie. She stood against racial injustices and fought for the underdog while not taking too kindly to things that people had said and done to her. She fought her own battles of self-confidence, trying to find her way in the world that thought she shouldn't have a voice. She should be unvoiced, especially because she needed to know her place with her race and her gender. You know, women's rights, they simply weren't right at that point, but they darn sure were necessary. Interestingly, 10 years after that film was released, in 1995, the United Nations held the 4th World Conference on Women in Beijing. At that time, 189 countries unanimously adopted the Beijing Declaration and the platform for action and agenda for women's empowerment. That was quite a pivotal document on women's equality at that moment. Now, how amazing is that? To be honest, the journey of the unvoiced woman has long been one that's been a point of interest of mine. So much so that I think back to the women's suffrage movement from the early 1900s. These women, they were tenacious. They made a difference, whether it was printing millions of leaflets for information or producing 1 million suffrage buttons or even holding thousands of meetings across New York State. Yet even with that work, it wasn't until several years later that women of color were even afforded some of the same rights and opportunities that those women before them had fought for. My great-grandmother, in fact, Josephine Anderson, born in 1906, was one of those women who marched in the small state of Delaware for various rights for everyone, because again, women's rights are human rights. But today, though, in 2021, this day, this year, many of our women are still facing the same battles of oppression, invisibility, mistreatment, and unacceptance faced by other women of the past. And just like in that movie, though there are robust, intelligent women with big voices, now big education, big creativity, and big connections, as well as big hearts full of innovation, thought leadership, compassion, and zeal for human rights. Just like you, your sisters, your mom, your daughters, your aunties, your friends, they're making impactful, sustainable changes. They're taking their rightful seats in the spaces to level the playing field. They're willing to stand in the gap even when it's hard and it's scary, to ensure that women are not looked at as anything other than valuable human beings. And that's what we are. They're stepping up, not on other people, while the world watches. And there ain't nothing ugly about that. We feel the energy of those who've done so much, and we know we're unstoppable. We can do anything, even if that means we're doing it wearing stilettos, wearing sneakers, carrying backpacks, or even going in with our briefcases, because that's what we do. That's exactly what we do. That's who we are. We're blazing trails, like US Vice President Kamala Harris, or Dorothy Height, who led the National Council of Negro Women, a force to be reckoned with in the women's movement in America. Malala Yousafzai, who served as an activist for girls in Pakistan since the age of 12. Yuriko Chiyama, a Japanese woman who fought for Black, Latinx, Native American, and Asian Americans in the US. And Phumzile Mlambo Ngcuka, United Nations Undersecretary General and Executive Director of UN Women. And can we forget? Oh no, we cannot. Our very own Ambassador, Bonnie Jenkins of WCAPS, the Women of Color, advancing peace, security, conflict. And honestly, as a point of reflection, I would offer to say that there's still many of our sisters working in a place of suffrage. They want to gain equality around the world, vying for equitable pay, imploring the world to see why basic human rights for all matter. They're fighting injustices against women and girls. And after all, we should all be doing that, right? So in conclusion, as I think, I invite you to imagine the women in the movement before us. Little did they know that as they worked their beautiful selves for future blazing trails, things that could benefit people hundreds of years from then, we, you, us, would be making our own way based on the foundational work, smiling in all shades of skin, like porcelain, buttercream, cocoa, butterscotch, milk chocolate, dark chocolate, and beautiful indigo. We, like our protagonist friend in this film, are ultimately not invisible. We are not unvoiced. We can celebrate that she was able to find her voice. She found her meaning in that movie. And no, let me rephrase that. We, for the record, show ain't ugly. Thank you.